Welcome to Work in Progress, Conversations with Creators. I'm your host, Logan Royce Beitman. On the program today, I have with me the writer Brandon Hobson, who just wrote the novel, The Devil is a Southpaw, which is really fascinating. We spoke about that and also the craft of writing and how messy it can be. And it was a great conversation. I hope that you enjoy.
If you enjoy our podcast, please like and subscribe and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us bring you more content like this. You can find this episode and all of our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. See the show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading news.
All right, Brandon, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And let's get right in. Let's talk about your novel, The Devil is a Southpaw. Really, really interesting novel that's kind of a novel within a novel, told by Milton Muleborn, who's a kind of unreliable narrator. I love unreliable narrators. So tell us a little bit about Milton.
Well, Milton, did you finish the book? Have you read the whole thing?
I got like 3/4 through, to be honest. I haven't gotten to the ending, but probably good. We don't want to reveal anything anyway. But.
Yeah. No, because I did an interview last week and in Santa Fe, and the radio host hadn't read the book, so he didn't even know what it was about. So that was kind of interesting.
All right. Well, I'm a little better than him, I guess. Okay. But, know.
Okay. I don't know. I mean, it's really hard to try to compress, everything. Milton, he's an unreliable narrator, and he's sent this manuscript to a Brandon, that he was locked up with many years ago. And he's telling his story about juvenile incarceration, and specifically he suffers from this envy, and he's just riddled with pride toward this Cherokee artist named Matthew. And it essentially, what we find out about Milton, I think it's pretty clear early on, is that he's struggling with severe mental illness, and that kind of comes out in his narrative throughout this book, that he's very angry and very jealous until the third part. There's the book is told in 3 parts, nonlinear, and he's written the third part many years later, and his voice sounds different.
Yeah.
He's kind of secluded himself, and is going through kind of a spiritual crisis, and ultimately is trying to forgive himself, and I think that's part of it. Is it's a change in him that hopefully becomes sort of redemptive, hopefully.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just getting into that part now, which is quite a change. So, it's really he's a fascinating character, and I guess, it seems like, everyone in this, it's a juvenile a detention center that's quite violent, quite unpleasant. A lot of people, the children that are in there have trauma from their past and from being in there,
Yeah.
And so, the kind of mental, psychological struggles are partly related to trauma and maybe other things, but it's interesting, because I've been thinking about I have, my dad was a very kind of spiritual, mystical guy, and he was always talking about these spiritual experiences he was having, and he would see signs from the universe everywhere. But, he was also diagnosed at one point as having, paranoia and schizophrenia.
Yeah.
So growing up, I never knew quite, how much of his reality that he was expressing were these delusions, or was it real? And I think that, I mean, that's kind of a personal connection I made, but I feel, there are, I mean, the work and other books you've written as well, it's informed partly by, indigenous, like Cherokee, mythologies and worldviews, where, like the world is bigger, that, there's a more than human, reality to spirits and these sort of things. And so I think that, that's like a interesting kind of, line to, I don't know, sort of, tightrope on, which I think you're doing, pretty. So there's this sort of myth aspect. There's possible, mental illness and trauma. There's also this sort of like fantasy elements, and film, is a big theme in the book as well. So, sorry, it's kind of a long question, but I'm interested to hear kind of how you're thinking about these different realities that kind of come together.
Well, part of that, I think, is I wanted to write a book that was different from my other books, but also incorporated all these different type of mythologies, right? And I mean, I think part of my interest in doing that is that I think about novels, and especially books that address Native issues, and I wanted to do something different than that when I think about, and something that hasn't been done before. I think partly about Leslie Silko's Almanac of the Dead. It's a very, if you've never read, most people read Ceremony, but if you've ever read Almanac of the Dead, it's this very big, dense, difficult and challenging novel, I think, in what everything in form and structure, the years that are covered in this book. And I always thought of that as kind of a different, she was kind of doing her own thing. And so I part of that, I think, with Southpaw here is, I wanted to address these Native sort of traditional stories, and um, uh, try to do something different than I've done before, and that hopefully other people have not done. And so it's just trying to make it my own thing, which is, I think, what we do with every book. But there's part of it here that this is the stuff that I'm really interested in, that I don't know that, that how widespread people are interested, how many people are really interested in this kind of stuff. My hope is more and more people are interested in it.
Well, when you say, this kind of stuff, you hope more and more people are interested in this kind. Like, what are you referring to precisely?
The kind of traditional mythology stories, and references to specifically to the tribe. Also, doing something postmodern and fracturing the narrative. There's always these discussions that people have that the postmodern novel is, nobody's interested in it anymore, and which I very, very much disagree with. I think a lot of people are interested in it. I don't know that it's not a mainstream type of book, right? This is a nonlinear narrative, fracturing narrative, doing things with structure in a way that's not kind of traditional. And I don't think it's really easy. And part of that is, I'm interested in challenging books. I think Almanac of the Dead is challenging. And so part of it is, I'm kind of interested in and giving that experience to the reader, because that's the experience that I like, which is essentially kind of it's like writing. It's kind of a mystical experience in some ways, for me anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been interested. I love, postmodern fiction, historical metafiction, or whatever,
Yeah,
this kind of stuff. And I feel like there's always going to be an audience. I don't know. I mean, but yeah, I guess you never know as a writer once you put it out. Like, you just have to see how people, I mean, I know you've been shortlisted for some awards, and, and it helps kind of get the word out,
yeah,
I don't know if anyone would have read Salman Rushdie's Satanic Verses, which is very, kind of experimental and weird, if it hadn't gotten all the attention it got, politically.
right.
So, I don't know. I mean, that's, but I suppose, you're not trying to write, supermarket fiction,
No. I mean, part of it, and I tell this to students when I teach. I mean, part of it is I think that, to me, the best art comes out of people who are, essentially, doing it for themselves. They're
Yeah.
pleasing themselves, in a kind of strange way that, I think people who generally think about audience, and I tell students, readership, if that's the reason you're writing, then I'm not sure that's, a very healthy way of looking at it, honestly, because you're ultimately going to be disappointed. This kind of, this business, I guess, whatever you call it, of, publishing and awards and that kind of stuff, that, um you just kind of have to let whatever happens. And if, uh, uh, I think there's a lot of great stuff out there that doesn't get any attention, and that certainly isn't marketed, due to money, publishers not having the money. There's all kinds of great, small press fiction out there, that's doing really weird, dark stuff that maybe isn't getting the recognition that the kind of stuff, like, people, especially celebrities, now more than ever, kind of have these book clubs that, where I think that they choose books largely on, they're very safe. They're very safe books. And I don't know that. I mean, I don't know that art is safe.
Right.
And I mean, maybe that's one of the things about literary fiction, is it's a kind of art, like poetry, um, and like painting and film, in some respect. And I think not looking at it like that is a very dangerous and unhealthy way of creating, writing, especially, right?
Yeah. Well, who do you think are some writers that are not that well known but are doing really interesting stuff that people should be aware of? Maybe,
Yeah,
people
I mean,
listen to
Brian,
this and
there's a very dark, horror writer. I don't want to call him a horror writer, but writes very dark fiction, named Brian Evanson. Has a really interesting story. He, was, excommunicated from the Mormon church, and because of his fiction, or he left the church, or, and
yeah,
because he wanted to do the stuff that he wanted to write. And, I certainly think there's another writer named, David Leo Rice, that, is a Brooklyn writer, who is writing some really interesting, dark, small press, stuff. Kelly Crumry, is a colleague of mine here in New Mexico State. She's, kind of a small press, doing some really interesting, sort of borderline poetry fiction. She has a book called Math Class that is essentially stories, retellings of saint stories in some ways,
huh,
but also addresses math and, just this really kind of smart stuff out there that it just, because of whatever press, uh, is publishing this stuff, they just often don't have the money to be able to market it. So,
yeah. No, I appreciate
so,
those recommendations. Because I haven't read any of them, but I it sounds fascinating. I'd like to.
Yeah.
And so, and you mentioned horror. I feel like, I mean, there's, this novel couldn't be really categorized as any one thing. There's elements of humor, there's elements of horror, I think also, and surrealism, and but there is a real darkness, that comes through. And I guess what do I want to ask about that? Do you think that like writer that you have to be? It just makes me think, there's this sort of myth of like the tortured artist or something. Do you have to feel that like pain inside in order to write about it?
I don't think so. I think, part of it is imaginative, writing imaginative fiction. And, I mean, uh, I don't know that this book is necessary. I'm not trying to be scary, right? I'm not trying to, um,
Right.
so I'm not trying to write to disturb, although I do think good fiction can be very disturbing. And right, there's that quote, right? That good fiction disturbs the comfortable, but also comforts the disturbed, right?
Right.
Um, but I'm not trying to. I think with this book, part of writing it through Milton's, through his point of view, is he's trying to write this kind of heavy literary book that is very much along the
Right.
lines of someone like Marquez or Kafka,
Yeah.
writing these very long, difficult sentences. And you mentioned Salman Rushdie. Certainly, a lot of his books are, I think, very challenging, not just culturally, but I think in terms of um, what they're doing on the line level. Um,
Yeah.
and and so I think Milton is trying to write a challenging, at least in part one in his manuscript, which is he tells us he had written years earlier, and
Yeah.
and then in part three he kind of goes back and he retells his story from a much um, more what I hope is a much more logical explanation of why he was dealing with so much anger and so much envy. And he sent this to the Brandon H character,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is uh, in hopes that because they were friends once, that he sees this kind of redemptive quality in him, and that
Yeah.
it's a way for him saying, here's my apology. I think.
But that style in the beginning of the sort of long sentences, slightly pretentious language and
Right.
references, and trying to be the sort of like, I want to, write, this great novel, I mean, it reminds me actually a lot of like Ishmael and Moby Dick, who I
Mhm.
feel like like he, which I think a lot of the fun of Moby Dick is that, I mean, it's written in this, like you can tell, it's not Melville's voice. It's this character who's really wanting to kind of impress us with his language, but and with his knowledge, and but he thinks whales are fish, and it's like things aren't always correct, right?
Right.
And I mean that was kind of and maybe it's an obvious reference, but that was a character I thought of when I was reading this.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I didn't think about Ishmael when I was uh, writing. I was thinking of a lot of just in general how a lot of writers, strive really hard to impress.
Mm.
They try not just with I mean, Milton's way is through using this difficult vocabulary, but um, a lot of writers are in some ways, instead of writing it, again, this is going back to what I was saying before, writing it for themselves, writing it for others. And,
Yeah.
and also it's kind of a narrative of him just not just showing off, but also kind of venting all his trauma from Strange Love, which is who runs the detention center and is in a wheelchair, and is an obvious reference to Dr. Strangelove, the film.
Yeah.
And the counselor and all the guards and everybody, all the authority in some way. And my hope is that I realize his voice can sound pretentious, but I also hope it reflects an anxiety and a kind of fear in a weird way.
No, I think I mean it definitely does, and like as readers, we can kind of peel back the layers, and I think see you as an author, what you're kind of allowing to unfold beneath the surface of his language. I do think it's a kind of a bit of a dangerous or scary thing to write in from the point of view of such a strong a character who has such a strong voice himself, that some readers might mistake that for your voice or your writing.
And I hope that based on my other, I realize there are people who may pick up this book and not knowing my other books, which are generally very different.
Right.
And so I have Where the Dead Sit Talking, and the Removed, the two books prior to this, which I think aren't very difficult at all. I think, and certainly the language is, and the prose is very, a lot more sort of simple. And so, that's a risk, right? It's a risk of, whether people might not like it and mistake. But I would think that readers of fiction are generally most are pretty intelligent people and can figure this stuff out, I would think. But I don't know.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to insult readers, but
No, I don't. No, I know, and I don't. I didn't mean to say that you were, but I guess readers of literary fiction, I think, kind of, are aware that the writer is always going to be taking risks.
Yeah.
Right? Or should be taking risks.
Yeah. And there's enough kind of unreality, and I mean, you give a lot of clues that that we're reading a fiction within a fiction, and so I think that's quite apparent. I mean, but I was going to ask you, so Where the Dead Sit Talking, also it deals with trauma. That's like in the case of foster care, and I mean, a lot of your work, you're dealing with kind of childhood trauma as a theme, and I'm wondering if, not to necessarily get too personal, but is there a reason why you think that comes up in the work?
I will just say this: I did social work for a few years, and kind of surrounded myself with people struggling and living very difficult situations, whether it was in juvenile incarceration, or working with foster kids, trying to find drug rehab places. And so these are the kinds of issues I think that I'm interested, because they're all around us. And I've never really wanted to, I didn't go to, any school and want to write a campus novel, for example, right? I didn't go to Stanford or Harvard or somewhere and think, I'm going to write a campus novel, or also the kind of, Brooklyn, the kind of Brooklyn, story that, So, those kinds of things I'm not really interested in, but really getting into um, how difficult people's lives are, and the struggles that they have, uh, is I think what I've been interested in, and that happens to be um, generally social, from social work, and those
Yeah.
kinds of issues. Yeah.
What was it like working in a juvenile correction institution?
Um, it's a very sad. Uh, I still dream about that. I'm back there working in that environment sometimes. I mean, the part of like my job, my job title was program coordinator, which was good. That because I didn't have to, like, I never had to be the bad guy. I could always be the
Mm.
good. I could always, and part of because I would sort of organize and design these programs where, whether it was games or having group discussion in the way that, like, maybe we did have counselors that came in and do this, but we would do a little bit more sort of like, we're not going to talk about heavy, serious stuff. Let's talk about, sports, or let's talk about music. What kind of music do you guys like? Those kinds of just
Yeah.
group sort of interaction, and also one-on-one if they, after hours, because I worked odd hours, they're there 24 hours a day. Sometimes I would work, um, till 9 or 10 at night. And if they were often upset about something, I would be the one to kind of go in and listen to them. And really, not that I had any kind of advice to give. And I don't know that they were even looking for advice. I think they just needed somebody one on one to listen to them. And so
Yeah.
in that environment, I spent, a lot of time just, sort of listening to them, um, and letting them know that they're safe. The juvenile uh, center where I worked at that time was not an unsafe place. In fact, there was never a fight that broke out, and that's because I think that the staff did a really good job of, making it feel, not overly dangerous or not overly threatening, and um, while also being very strict. But um, but it's a sad. It's anytime, especially a child, when you lock up a child, it's a very sad thing. And
Yeah.
you know, so um, that experience. Um, I sometimes think about some of those people who would now be, I don't know, 30 or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or in the 30s. What they're doing now, and hoping that they're okay. But I recommend everybody go in and do something that, is I out of their comfort zone for a job. I think especially for a writer. I don't know how
Yeah.
many. I mean, I have students that, they're undergraduates and then they come into graduate school and they essentially have no sort of life experience. Right? Some of
Right.
them.
Right.
I mean, working. I mean, by that I mean working in various jobs. That.
Yeah.
So I always kind of push them. Okay, what job did you do? And then I start to hear these really kind of interesting answers. Like, oh yeah, one summer I worked, for a music festival, and I had to, clean the bathrooms and like go
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
trash and deal with, all that kind of, like, this is okay. Let's go with this, right? This is much better than, some of the other stuff of, again, like writing the sort of campus story or love story or breakup, that kind of stuff, divorce.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, along those lines, let me ask you, what do you think of the advice you always hear, write what you know? Because I think, I mean, in some cases, I mean, you kind of have to write things that you don't know or that you want to know. But if you're, but I think, not having, like you said, young writers who haven't had much life experience, it's going to be maybe tough for them to. Yeah. What do you think of that idea of sort of like write what you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that that's to an extent true, but also I think it's really fun to explore. I mean, and research stuff so one can research uh very easily now. It's not like it's that difficult to research certain things. And I mean, I think the tricky part is getting inside the heads of characters who have
Yeah.
experienced certain things. That's, I mean, how do you make something believable while also, um, going beyond the real, those it's so, yeah, I mean, I think you can certainly think people who are interested in speculative fiction, um, dystopian stories, it seems to be students seem to be real popular. Um, I think early on, especially, what's more important, I think, is writing out of this pleasure that your experience. Like I love to draw and I love to paint. I don't know that I'm not really that good, but it's in a way very healing to me. It's something that I get great pleasure from.
Yeah.
Just the act of doing it. And I think writing is like that. The more, I write and I mean, and then it's, when it's done, it's kind of, it's over. And, then we're supposed to talk about this stuff. But there's the actual act of writing should be, pleasurable. And, um, I think some people may disagree with that and look at it more as work or, and it is, and in a certain way it's difficult. But, um, there's something about, if you ask any writer, what's your favorite book? They'll usually say the one I'm working on right now. It's what I
Right.
told them. I
Right.
feel
Right.
like this is my favorite one usually. And when people, some things fall flat, they die on the page, and that's the stuff that you just want to trash and get rid of and move on to something else.
Yeah.
If you can't repair
Um,
it. Mhm.
yeah. No, I mean, I would say I don't generally enjoy writing. I mean, it's what, I do here, and I write art criticism, and
Yeah.
I want to write a novel someday, and, kind of working slowly on that. But, um, I I feel like I'm good at writing, and I enjoy when I've crafted a really nice sentence, or I've expressed something, a new idea or something. I mean, it's like that I get pleasure from, like, once I've done it, but the actual act, I mean, I don't know. I think it's always a struggle for me, and I think, I had, a professor, Lynn Sharon Schwartz. I don't know if she's written a bunch of novels and short stories and things, but she's the only writer I feel like that I've met that she said writing is always just a pleasure. She just sits down, she enjoys writing. It's very easy for her.
Mm.
It never feels like a struggle. But I mean, is that the way? Because I know other famous, E.L. Doctorow said, he would be like just struggling on something forever, and like take a 300-page manuscript and just throw it against the wall, because, and I feel like, I don't know what's, I guess there's there's a sort of spectrum, but it sounds like you enjoy it.
I do. Yeah. I mean, it's the hard part is, how do you work through the problems, right? How do you work
Mm.
through the structure? And sometimes you get stuck on something and you have to work it out, right? Like, and that becomes very difficult and can be very frustrating. I don't know that, I, again, I think of it as I do drawing and painting. It, it's, it does something more for me than I think. When I start thinking about the reader too much, that's when it becomes not enjoyable.
Mm.
Now, I don't necessarily write book reviews or enjoy writing those, or certain. I remember when I was doing a PhD, certain papers that I didn't necessarily enjoy writing because I wasn't totally into there's a certain it's academic writing, right? It's
Yeah.
totally different, and uh, that's it's really hard to enjoy that for me anyway. And so there's freedom in fiction, right? That's you can do anything's possible. You can do whatever you want,
Mm.
and that becomes, I think, the fun of it. And I think
Yeah.
when you read a novel or a short story that you really love, what is it? It's kind of sitting down and thinking, what is it? What are they doing here? Why do I love this so much? Right? I know it's interrogating these themes that I'm interested in. Also, but what's it doing on a line level, on a sentence level,
Yeah.
and what are they doing with language and wordplay? I mean, I think a lot of the frustration that a lot of people have is, and this might be, I don't know if you feel like this, it's just sitting down. You just have to, I had an old teacher, Stuart Onan, that used to just say, you have to stay in the chair.
Right.
You have to sit there. And,
Yeah.
and sometimes you're just sort of pulling on your bottom lip and but you can't be distracted. You have to sit there, and eventually, stuff will come.
Yeah.
But I do find that when it works best, when I have uh, this idea or something, of a scene or an image. Often starts with an image, and I just want to sit down and play with it and see what happens with it, see where it goes.
Yeah.
That's a good so you can start. So you don't have to start at the beginning. You can start in the middle, or just start somewhere. But just start getting stuff down on the page and see where it goes without worrying too much about what you're going to do with it later on.
Yeah, I feel like with me, like when I've tried to, I get an idea for a novel.
Hmm.
My instinct is always to like make a million outlines and really plot everything out,
Okay.
and then if I could spend forever doing that. And
Right.
then once I sit down to write it, it's like, well, I feel like I've already figured it out. So now it's kind of like it almost becomes rote, and I'm not having that pleasure of just discovering on the page.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I can't really work like that. With plotting out um, chapters, uh, or scenes, or I mean, that kind of stuff, I think, kind of comes later, and it usually involves someone helping me, like my agent or editor, kind of rearrange things, or a reader, a friend that I uh, trust, that will be honest with me, and I'll say, does this feel like the right order?
Yeah.
Or should I rearrange some of this? So I think that the most important thing is sort of banging it out first,
Yeah.
right? Bang it all out right at the beginning, and then figure out how you want to rearrange things.
Yeah, like with this novel, did you know from the beginning, that it was gonna be a novel within a novel, and that this was you had an idea of who the narrator was and what their voice sounded like, or that
I,
developed over time?
it it I it kind of got a little bit out of hand. I at some point, I think, maybe I went a little bit too far on this, but I knew when I sat down. I remember, I started working on this. I think it was right before the pandemic,
Uh-huh.
and it was even before my last book came out. That I was sitting down and I was thinking about this. It really kind of started with this image of a boy kind of floating, in a river with birds all, like, he's
Yeah.
drowned. after escaping from a detention center. And so that's really where the image, the boy face down in water, birds just kind of flying all over the place, steam coming off the water, and this kind of cryptic image came to mind. And I thought, okay, that feels like that's a scene that would after an escape, right? A boy has escaped from, right. And so it really kind of started with that image. And then I thought, when I started writing this kind of wild escape scene, going through the woods and seeing, spirits, and it just kind of soon, the voice became so erratic and so surreal that I thought, okay, this, I want to tell this through someone else's point of view. And I don't know who that person is yet, but I don't want readers thinking this is me and my writing style, because I was really having a lot of fun just sort of, with the strange imagery and this kind of almost angry voice, about, uh, uh, you know, about the escape and why he escaped, and that he's found drowning, which turns out to be not true at all. He's not dead, right? So I at that point it was like, okay, I think I want this to be, told through another narrator who's going to be unreliable. And so every time I would sit down and nothing was necessarily in order, it was which I like nonlinear narratives, and challenging books that, Rushdie, again, you mentioned him, not just the Satanic Verses, but a lot of his books are very challenging. Midnight's Children is employs a lot of
and there's like different narrators in that, kind of or he,
different area, very strange imagery, and he has his first book is, I think it didn't get the attention that it should. I believe it's called, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Grimus. Grimus. It's kind of a mythological story that I love that book. I know people.
It's a little bit more like James Joyce or something. The way, I mean, it's like not exactly, but kind of a different style than we're used to with him.
A lot of his stuff is it's a kind of that in that book, a man washes up in the ocean, on the beach of an ocean, right? And this couple discover him, but it's really just kind of mythological tale, and fun. He's a very imaginative, amazing writer.
And I'm wondering, I mean, I know, he grew up kind of with all the South Asian mythologies of various religions and cultures, which he pulls into his work. And he's very clear in interviews that he's a staunch atheist, but his writing is full of magic and mystery and spiritual things, and I wonder, I mean, how much of, like, did you grow up with a lot of kind of like, because I know you're Cherokee, did you have like stories and myths and things that were part of your experience in your childhood?
Yeah, a little bit. There was a little bit of that. There was also at some point, and this is more recently, I became more interested in reading about the saints, and you mentioned earlier these kind of visions that your father had. That if you read the Saint, I read Saint Teresa of Avila. She has a book called the Interior Castle, looking at our soul as a castle that has I believe there are 7 different mansions, which is all representative of 7 different levels of meditative prayer. And she, that's it's a difficult book, but it's very fascinating. I find those stories as fascinating as I do some of the traditional Cherokee stories. Um, and and again, I've only just kind of in the past few years have really started reading them and um, listening to or not listening to them on audio necessarily, but listening to interviews about people who've read them and podcasts and the kind of visions that some of those people had. I think are very surreal and very very strange. Uh, and so yeah, there's a spiritual element that I'm really fascinated with, uh, not just out of Cherokee culture, but I think in a larger, you know, very much, God uh, imagery and um, and thinking about that through nature. I think if there's
Yeah.
any way that I'm focusing on this spirituality, it's through nature. So I always try to employ something that is done through the wind, through trees,
Right.
water.
Birds, maybe, or yeah, water. Yeah.
Sure, yeah, just that kind of humanizes the earth in ways that I think feel very important. The earth
Yeah.
the earth responds to trauma. It feels like to me in the way that people respond to trauma, and that we treat the earth badly, it's going to react. We, uh, but it's also going to heal itself, right?
Right.
So, doing things with gravity is always fun too. You know, I like I remember in the book The Removed, I had this image that was an early image working on that book as well of rain falling up, right? Rain rising instead of falling. And
Right.
um, so I think a lot of that is, yeah, we could go to a park and sit outside and not notice anything, right? But if we sit there and, for a while, things start to feel very much alive and really think about what nature is doing and then using, yeah, I think for the writer, using the imagination of how does this become a conversation? What is what's nature trying to tell me right now? I don't know if that sounds too earthy or too hippie-ish of me to say this stuff, but I'm totally fascinated by it. Yeah.
No, me too. And I think it's important. I feel like so many of us, we feel disconnected from nature in our day-to-day lives, and
Yeah.
we may be looking for ways to reconnect. And I think that yeah, and I mean I think that so do you ever, like, do you go out into nature and bring a notebook or something along and write from observation ever, or you how does kind of the actual natural world inform what you write?
I try to, well, I mean, when I can, I try to sit outside as much as, and I live down here in Las Cruces.
Yeah.
And, like, I mean, I sit out on days when it's not, the dust isn't blowing around and making me sneeze.
Right.
You know, um, I really like sitting outside and just kind of, I mean, it's a kind of meditation, I guess. Right. And,
Yeah.
there's, leaving the phone inside and, that may be kind of what why writing is appealing also is, I put the phone in the other room and just sort of get lost in the imagination for a while. And I do feel like, yeah, try to pay attention outside too. But some of it's like, how can I think about, rather than just describing, the breathing of trees, how, what can I do with that in what I'm working on? Why is that important? Right. And so when I sit outside, I'm usually trying to work through something that I'm thinking about story wise, and thinking about how can I incorporate. I think I have a lot of students. A lot of students will. I told Dr. Momaday this in Santa Fe when I had the honor of meeting him. I had lunch with him, and I said, I introduced a lot of Momaday's work to students because of his description of the land and landscape, and not just in his fiction but in his poetry,
Yeah.
and using those examples for students to say, what's he doing here? Why is he focusing so much on this, the eagle flying around in circles? Or what's he doing with the river over here? What's he telling us? And getting them to think about that. I feel like a lot of people, everything's so interior. Scenes take place inside a lot, and outside it's usually not focused on the earth. It's not focused on landscape. It's focused on whatever's happening between characters outside. Right.
Yeah.
And again, that's just my heavy interest in nature, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love it. I feel like there are, maybe more writers coming back to this, because it's something you see in a lot of like 19th century novels, these long descriptions of nature. And I've, talked to people that say, oh yeah, I just skip over those and go to the, and it's like, no, you can't skip.
Right,
That world is a character, the setting is a character too,
Yeah.
But I think, maybe it used to be more common because it's like you couldn't just Google what a place looked like and have images pop up. So, you have to describe it.
Yeah.
But I do think that, and especially the way that you incorporate it, it really does. I feel like the setting and those natural elements do become characters.
Yeah. In some ways, right, what's the symbol here, right? If you're thinking of, what are you not directly telling the reader by showing them, something through what nature is doing, or through the balloon that's the lost balloon that's sort of floating in the sky in the distance. What's the story? What's the story behind I love that. What's the old movie, the black and white movie, the red balloon, right?
Yeah.
About the boy and
the friend is right.
Yeah. Who did that film?
It's a French film. It's a beautiful film. It's sad. At one point they like destroy the balloon, but then at the end he floats up with all the who it's a famous film. I can't think of the director,
but it's totally fascinating. The balloon, is essentially just following the boy to school and waiting on him like a dog, or a person, just in love with the boy. And it's this beautiful short film. But I don't know if that's a great example really, but I mean that paying attention to those kinds of things, I think I've always been much more interested in. Yeah.
Well, and I think it's a good example of something also that you do and writers can do, where, the premise, if you just read the premise of that film, it's like, it seems absurd. Like, balloons don't follow kids around. It's not, it's a stupid little, rubber thing that's been inflated. It's not, has no personality, but yet it's like the world that's constructed in that film is so complete, and so that it you just believe it, and then you feel sad when the the balloon dies, and it's like you get really invested. It's so anthropomorphized to be like ridiculous, and yet it's not ridiculous. You really feel it, and I feel like that's something that when a filmmaker or writer or anyone can pull that off, it's kind of amazing.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. Yeah. I mean, and I think it's important also to always to be that's a good example, to be aware, to get to think about other things rather than so many times people will say, I don't know what to write about. I mean, I'm sort of stuck here. I don't know, should I write about two people going through a divorce, right? And to me, it's just you have to do that. Obviously, you have to do that in in some kind of new or fresh way. Otherwise, how many stories are out there about people going through divorce or their parents going through divorce or whatever that, how can you make it sort of your own? Um, if talking about, um, these things, and then people will, often will, and I say this, I say people, I guess I should say students, often the ones that I talk most about with writing, and they're all often beginning writers, and so they're looking for something to write about, right? And I think a lot of what I tell them is something will come, right? If you do what Stuart Onan says, and if you sit and force yourself to sit and play with images, just write out images, no matter how strange they are, whether it's a balloon floating around, what can you do with that? The John Gardner's old writing craft book, the Art of Fiction. There's an exercise I always liked where one is like, describe a lake from the point of view of a man who has just committed murder, and how is that different than describing the same lake from the point of view of a child,
Right.
or something like that, right? Like, and playing with those kinds of very simple writing exercises, often something will come out of that. It just never fails that something will, it's an image or something that you should go with. And often it's like, I'm not sure what the most interesting thing here of all this fluff that I've kind of written down, but having, a trusted reader or group of friends that will say, here's what's really interesting. The story is not about, going through a breakup. The story is about loneliness. It's what this guy is doing because he's so lonely. That's the interesting part of the story, right? It's not the divorce. The story isn't about divorce. It's about loneliness. And so, helping find the parts of the story that maybe are the more interesting story also. But again, I think, so much of this comes from us just forcing ourselves to sit down and also being okay with realizing, you know what, I'm going to sit here. I'm going to spend about an hour, which sounds like a long time, but if you really get into it, it goes by really quickly. But I'm going to spend some time, no matter how long this time is, I'm going to spend my time here, and I'm going to probably trash most of this. And it's okay, because maybe there's one paragraph that if I write 3 pages, maybe there's one paragraph that I can save that I like. And it, not every single sentence or word that I write has to be saved. And there's liberating about sitting down and realizing, you know what? I mean, most of this may be garbage today. I don't know. I'll probably trash it, but why not? I'm going to take these chances and see what happens. And I think that has always been where, with my books and my stories, maybe not so much my short stories, but especially with the novels, that's kind of how it's just been a very messy process. Don DeLillo, in his novel Mao 2, uses that metaphor of the baby as like writing a novel. And it's the metaphor is, when a newborn baby, they're very messy and you have to change them and you have to clean them up and you have to care for them. And then eventually they're able to sort of, as they grow, based on the care that you give them and eventually they can take care of themselves, right? They can do things on their own. They start walking around and talking. But at the beginning, there's this kind of messy blob of, baby that you have to just constantly feed and love and do all these. Yeah, it's a kind of an interesting metaphor for thinking about the process of writing. And it is, I mean, for me anyway, it's very messy. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think on that note, this has been really wonderful. No, and I think that anyone. I mean, it's inspiring for me. I'm going to get back into writing my novel now. I think, and anyone who's an aspiring writer out there, I think can take away quite a bit from this. You've given a lot, so I appreciate your generosity.
Oh,
here.
Sure. Yeah. Sorry if I talked a little bit. I kind of rambled at the end there, but
No, I really appreciated it. So yeah, thank you again. This has been really wonderful, and I hope that people come out and see you at the Santa Fe International Literary Festival, and that they read your books.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's May 17th at 4 is when I'm Sunday at 4.
Thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Logan. Yeah, appreciate it.